A musical soliloquy episode 12 is here. My name is Steven and this is Zach. Today we're talking about interpretation specifically.
Yes. And in regards to interpretation, big picture versus details and how to balance that. I think that in general, it's very difficult sometimes to zoom out when you're zoomed in, and also vice versa. It's difficult to zoom in when you're zoomed out. And balancing that is key to a successful interpretation. So, this episode, we're going to break up into three main parts. Part one, we'll talk about detail work and the importance of it. In part two, we'll talk about big picture. And part three is going to be about combining those two things successfully. So let's start off with part one, microscope mode. Steven, I feel like you're always a very analytical person and you are very careful about how you phrase and shape everything, and you have a keen ear for details, while also, of course, having a good big picture as well. But would you like to talk a little bit about what you focus on right when you first start a piece?
Yeah, sounds good. I did mention earlier that I think it's good to look at the big picture first, actually, of a piece, but the order of today's podcast will be on the details first.
Well, we can switch things around. Actually, maybe that would be good. Maybe part one, let's do big picture or architect mode, because you're right. I think that is very important.
Okay, sounds good. Well, big picture. Yeah. So I like to listen to the piece, a good recording of it, and get a kind of feel for it. I feel like when you listen to a piece, it's kind of like getting to know someone, meeting them, talking to them, asking how they're doing and where they came from. When you listen to a piece by a foreign composer, let's say by a composer you have never heard of, just by listening to it, it helps you start to develop a feel for their harmonic language, their rhythmic language, and all that sort of thing. So I think listening is one of the most powerful tools as a musician. And then obviously, once you get the score, you can take a look at the score and start to zoom out and look at how the piece is structured. So if it's sonata form, if it's ABA form, if it's some complicated form, and pick out exactly what themes there are, the main themes. And usually there's a maximum of 3 or 4 in one movement. Even though a movement can be like 20 minutes long, it's actually a lot of times just a couple simple themes or parts of themes that are based off other parts of themes. And so, really figuring out what those themes are, what are the main characters that those themes convey. And yeah, after that, then I think you can start to dive deeper into the microscope mode. But I think just starting out by listening and just first impressions and just, yeah, getting to know a piece that way is probably the best way.
And I think that definitely helps in terms of learning pieces quicker. Understanding the structure of a piece surely helps with that. What reason would you give for approaching a piece this way, or why do you think it's so important to look at big picture first?
Yeah, I think it's important in general as a life principle, actually, to think big picture first, actually, because if you have a big picture direction, then you'll be clearer on your smaller picture direction as well. Um, but also, when you focus only on smaller picture stuff, you lose sight of the bigger picture. So, when you have that bigger picture, then even if little things don't go your way, you know that you're still averaging moving forward in the right direction. And so if you're too focused on smaller things, you can start drifting off towards the wrong direction. We're practicing the wrong things, obsessing about things that don't matter so much. And so, yeah, I would say a big reason why it's important to approach a piece that way is so that when you're practicing your more detailed stuff, that you know better how to prioritize it, because there's a lot to practice. It's almost endless. And so when you kind of know what your priorities are, then you can really focus more and spend more time on it in your practice for that specific piece. So if, for example, Mendelssohn Concerto, there's a lot of technical stuff there. But if you really just want to bring out the lyrical singing parts of that piece, then you can really focus on bringing your sound and to a more expressive level. If you want to bring out the more technical virtuosic passages, um, then you can focus on that. Obviously, the best performances, they kind of have everything.
Mhm.
Everything is really polished, but it's really hard, right? I mean, especially if you're thinking a lot about, I don't know, left hand, or you're thinking a lot about bow, there's no way that it doesn't go into your performance. Um, but obviously, not letting it be too big of a factor. Don't let your own personal technical mind get too much into the big picture, but knowing, okay, like Mendelssohn Concerto, I want to bring out this lyrical singing quality. Then in my detailed work, I won't get so bogged down on maybe I can't hit the shift perfectly, or this passage isn't perfectly clean. I'll still know that, okay, well, I'm still bringing out the essence of this piece, which is the lyricism. So then if I have
Mhm.
time, obviously I want to keep working on building it up, but I know that I'm still bringing out what really matters the most.
I think these are such good points, and going along with our big picture architect mind mode, I think it's important to have a design for the music exactly, to know what you're creating. And then, of course, when you're laying the bricks and all that kind of stuff, you want to do a good job so that your building doesn't fall over or that there aren't gigantic gaping holes in the middle of walkways, etc. But it's easy to zoom in so close on details and be trying to do everything so precisely that at the end, you might not even have the original structure you imagined, anymore. Or it's like, "Oh, look at these bricks. They're so even, they're perfect." And you admire the bricks, but the whole thing is a mess. It's not even a building. It's just a few bricks really nicely laid together.
Yeah.
It's the same with, I think, painting too. When people paint like huge murals or huge paintings, I think it must be difficult when you zoom in and you go in, there's so much detail in there. But these great painters, they not only have incredible detail, but such a good idea of the entire painting as a whole. You can experience it in a way that feels profound and big picture mode. And then when you zoom in and you observe the small brush strokes and all of the details, there's also so much beauty there too. Ideally, I think in an interpretation, like you said, it's great to have both. It's great for people to appreciate your solidity and technique and all your details and phrasing, but to also appreciate the piece as a whole and to I think that you're totally right. Big picture in general matters more because, yeah, if you don't have big picture, then you don't have a story or a narrative, a musical narrative.
Yeah. And at a very high level, most people have the big picture down, I would say. So we always say details are what makes the difference at the end, which I guess is more small picture stuff. But even still, like everything is related. And I think you'll be able to bring out more details if you know what details you want to bring out, first of all, more,
Mhm.
which I think comes
Yeah.
more from big picture. And yeah, just now that I'm doing more video creation and creative things, I'm realizing that it's the same for this too. I mean, of course, we can obsess and make every single little video and every audio look perfect and make the perfect cuts and whatever. But, at the end of the day, if we're not communicating the main essence and focusing on that, we can get a little bit too caught up in the little technical details too. So, yeah.
That's true. Yeah, it kind of applies to everything in life, which is cool, I think. So, after you have the big picture, would you say, just a general sense, do you then zoom into the details and then zoom out at the end as well? Because what I notice for me is I also like to get a big picture sense first, but then once I have a vague sense of what I want to convey, I like to zoom in and focus on, of course, learning all the notes and detail work and things like that, and to just feel comfortable with playing the piece. And then after I get everything down, then I find that I typically have to zoom out again to try to think about the piece holistically, because sometimes you get bogged down in your detail work and you start thinking about things, specific phrases in a certain way, because you've practiced these phrases so many times out of context. Once you insert them into context, what you thought would really work in that small setting doesn't necessarily work for the whole, and I find that I often have to reframe and rethink things that I've practiced to make it work with the overarching theme of what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, that's totally it. I think that's the process of what we're doing is giving an interpretation of a piece is first of all, yes, big picture, and then zooming in and zooming back out. And that zooming back out part is very important because we need to be able to present the piece as a whole product. And so when you zoom out, you're able to see actually what parts aren't quite up to par and some parts that are really good. And so then you zoom back in and then you try to bring those parts that aren't as good back up. But yeah, I think that's essential for eventually performing because again, when we perform, it has to be a finished product. So it needs to be basically good throughout. Of course, little things can happen here and there, but overall, the best products are ones that have a very holistic idea of what they're trying to say, a thesis, maybe, and then just not drifting ever too far away from that.
That's so interesting. I was just thinking too, how with music, zooming out, you can zoom out in many different ways and things get bigger and bigger. For instance, when you're really detailed, you might be focusing on intonation for just a few specific notes. You zoom out a little bit and that becomes one phrase. You zoom out a little bit more and that becomes the exposition of a piece. And then you have to zoom out more to get the frame of the whole movement, and you have to zoom out even more to understand the structure of the entire piece. And I think that it kind of reminds me of a novel in a way, because when I'm reading sometimes, ooh, what a nice word. This is a great, I love this word. I love that word. They make you feel a certain way. And it's the same when you're playing. You can get a really nice color on specific notes, and oh, I love this. But it's easy for writers and for musicians. You love one note so much, sometimes you add a color that doesn't necessarily work with the phrase or with what you're trying to do. Or if everything is too beautiful and you're adding too many things, sometimes you lose the flow of what you're trying to do. You're singing here and you're singing there, and everything's beautiful, but nothing means anything. And so I think that it's important to think in terms of that. So in terms of words themselves, notes themselves should be beautiful, but in the context of sentences, musical sentences, and then understanding the musical chapters, what you're trying to convey as an entirety of a piece too. I think that's so important. And do you ever change your interpretation completely? Have you changed your interpretation completely from the your initial conception to what you actually do later on in performance?
Usually not too much. Usually I kind of have an idea of how I want it to sound, and then I work hard to try to get it up to a higher level. And then I present it, and it is kind of what it is. I think if there are changes, it's more just bigger picture stuff of, I guess, even bigger picture of just my development as a musician and violinist. I think there are some things that have evolved over the years, but I think generally, in terms of a piece, I basically know how I want it to sound. And if I don't, then I try to stay still at that step one spot. And
Mm,
I'd mentioned singing, and I like to sing a lot. Singing a piece and going through it in your mind, like a conductor would study a score, I think is really great. Before you even touch a finger on your violin or instrument, it's all in your brain at the end of the day, actually. So, starting from there and then just knowing that your instrumental work is just a means to get to where you initially wanted to do. So, I would say not really, actually.
wow, that's pretty cool. And I love what you said about everything being in your brain. It's always easy for me to feel like music is an external thing, but you're right, it only happens internally. And yeah, the importance of the mind in music creation or any creation of art is so important. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I get bogged down easily on certain little details as well, and it's easy to forget about the bigger picture. And I tend to get stressed about little things like my posture or like intonation, a very common one, or I don't know, just like what bow stroke you're using. For me, that's happened a lot. So, and still do to this day. So, a lot of it is still experimentation for me. We're still always growing. Even if you are world famous instrumentalist, I think there's still aspects where you can refine your playing. And the best players refine their playing over years and years and years of doing the same thing and learning something. Maybe after they've done it hundreds of times, maybe not so ideally, do they finally realize what might be a little better. So
Mhm.
it's a long journey.
It is a long journey. One thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit is I actually have changed my view on pieces, I think maybe a lot. I think that my initial conception of a piece is usually pretty there are some pieces that I just really love initially, but I feel like it's hard for me to know exactly what I wanna do with the piece until I've learned it, and once I learn it, then I feel musically free to express things in so many different ways, and through the process of learning, I get so many ideas like, "Oh, this reminds me of this, and this reminds me of that." And just living my life, I feel like when I'm walking outside, I see certain things and I think, oh, that reminds me of this piece. And I'm excited. I go home and I write it down in my music. And then whenever I get to a part like that, it helps me connect the narrative, the musical narrative through the piece. For instance, when I first started learning Havanaise by Saens, I, I remember in an earlier episode, you said that you really loved Perlman's recording of this piece, and it was a major influence when you were first starting to learn violin. You thought it was so beautiful. Well, I actually had an exact opposite reaction to Havanaise by Perlman. I loved Perlman when I was younger, but I hated that piece. And every time I used to play with toys while I listened to albums, and I remember vividly, I used to play with my toys on the floor, and then Perlman's Havanaise would come up, and I'd run to the CD player and skip it because I hated that piece so much. And then later on in life, this conductor asked me to play Havanaise with orchestra, and I thought, "Oh, great, Havanaise, that sounds like a cool piece." And then I listened to it, and I was like, "Oh, no, it's a piece that I hated." And so initially I was like, "Oh, man, well, you can't play something well that you don't like, in my opinion." So I think that you always have to find a way to like what you're playing, but it shouldn't be forced. It's just like meeting people. People have different personalities, and sometimes a personality might not be a perfect match for your personality, but everyone has redeeming traits. Everyone has things to admire about them, even if you don't click instantly. There are those people where you have to spend time to get to know them, and they may be a little rough around the edges, but there's a lot to appreciate there. I feel the same about a piece like Havanaise, which I couldn't stand the piece. I thought it was so horrendous. But but once I started learning it, I found that it was such a great piece for being able to express yourself and for finding different shades of color because the theme repeats over and over throughout the piece. And it's this nice habanera, but it's basically the same thing for a long time. And I felt that it helped me a lot in varying my tone. And I had to think of a story, basically. Sometimes I think of stories, sometimes I think of non narrative type interpretations. But for this one, I had a story, and the story that I created in my mind made the piece so much more interesting to play. And it was, I really liked it. So, I mean, the story is not so incredible because I was kind of young, but I was thinking at the beginning of the piece, there's a man walking through the streets of Spain, and he sees this beautiful woman that he wants to talk to. In the first part, in his mind, he's expressing how beautiful she is and all this kind of stuff, and she seems so enchanting. And so then he's trying to get up the nerve to talk to her, but then he loses her in the crowd. Like, there's just a bunch of people, they're in a crowded area, and he loses her. And then he sees her again, and he's trying to get up the nerve to talk to her, and etc. And at the end of the piece, he's about to confess his love, but he finds out that she's already with someone else and they have a family and everything. So at the end, it's like the death of a beautiful memory, but it's still very beautiful, I think. It's, like, a little bit regretful, but, well, good thing I didn't go and etcetera. So, yeah, that's kinda what I thought when I played the piece, and for some reason, just having a simple story like that made it so much more interesting for me because there was a clear narrative that I wanted to express through the music rather than it just being a bunch of beautiful notes that didn't really mean so much to me personally.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that story because I am actually working on the Havanaise right now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's
Um,
super cool.
yeah, working through it. I mean, I've played through it before, but I actually want to record it at a high level. And yeah,
Nice.
that's a great story. I'm going to use it for my interpretation.
Oh, I'm excited. What's your interpretation of Havanese? Or if you don't mind me asking, I'm just kind of interested. Or what does it always bring to mind for you?
Well, I don't really have a story like that comes to mind, but I guess the feeling is it's just very pleasant, like you mentioned in the beginning, very enchanting. I didn't even know it was a habanera, which I learned recently based on the Spanish sort of dance theme. I just thought it was very catchy and I liked the key of E major. And, when it was the fast section, which I can think of getting lost in the crowd now, I thought that was very virtuosic. When I was
Mhm.
8 or 9, that was very amazing to me. And then, yeah, there's crazy flying staccato in there. That's really impressive. And I guess I just like the singing aspect of it because I've always liked singing pieces. And
Mhm.
that piece is a lot of singing. There's fast parts, but yeah, a lot of singing. And at the
Yeah.
end, there's crazy double stops, vibrato
Mhm.
slides up there. So that was really cool as a kid. And I always remember the ending of that piece because it is so special. It's sort of this reflective, happy but sad at the same time
Mhm.
reflection over all that had passed. And it's extremely beautiful. And right at the end there, you get that minor yadi dadi yadi yadi dadi yadi. So it isn't all happy. Like that's why I
Mhm.
like your
It's
story.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks. Yeah, man, I love the ending so much. That is one of the most beautiful endings, I think, of any piece that I've heard. And yeah, it wraps up everything so nicely. And I like that it keeps the same kind of rhythm. It feels tropical to me at the end with the way the rhythm is, and yeah.
Oh,
And at
wow.
the beginning too, yeah. Just the ya-da-da-da-da, it's really nice. And actually, you might like this. You might know already, but there's a singer, Perry Como, and he took the melody of the Havanaise and its influence. There's this song called, it starts with like, you catch a falling star and you put it in your pocket, and like, and something else is like, catch a falling star and put it in your pocket, something 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 something, you know what I mean? And like, it's pretty nice. I like that visual of catching a falling star and putting it in your pocket, and even just thinking about that when I'm playing that opening theme makes me play it more beautifully, I think. That's a nice visual.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I like that song. And yeah, it's just very beautiful. It's very simple, but that's all you really need, right? So, yeah. Why don't we jump to small picture, aka detailed work? What are some of your approaches to detailed work, and how do you like to practice it, I guess?
Well, I think it really depends on the piece. And there are some people who I think are very methodical, and they're like, okay, well, this is the hardest part and I'm going to practice this first. And I think that's great. But I always start from the beginning. And I always just go through a piece. Like, if I'm working on something, I'll go through the first movement first. And I like to be able to play the whole things of things, and I don't necessarily like jumping to the hardest section first. So I just like playing things that I can play, and usually things don't start out super hard. And if they do, then I'll usually get stuck on the beginning for a while before I move on, because I just enjoy being able to play through things. So whatever I encounter at the beginning, I'll work through. And in particular, I think the openings of things are so important. I usually obsess a little bit over the opening. If I have a lot of time to learn a piece, maybe I'll spend more time than I should just on the first page. And I'll just keep playing the first page over and over and trying to find a sound that I really enjoy. And because usually when you first start learning a piece, it sounds pretty bad, like at the beginning. I think that's pretty normal. So I think that I try to iron out some of the problems. And then whenever I do encounter something, so then when I'm zooming in on the details, I feel like I'm always thinking in terms of musical direction and the flow of music. And if something doesn't work, then usually I'll stop to fix it. Say if I'm playing something like Havanaise, since we talked about that, the opening, the ya, ya, da, 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 ya, starts with this nice scale up to a B to a B. And I always found that it was difficult to find exactly the right sound, because the orchestra just has a very, very simple opening. Ya da da dum bum ya bum. Ya da da dum bum ya bum. And then, of course, again, ya da da dum bum bum, ya da da dum bum. But then everything changes when you come in. So I feel like that very first note has to be so magical. I always think if it were a film, everything's dark. And then when you play the first note, the picture opens up and you just see this incredible tropical, or, just very beautiful place. And yawn. And then I think the scale is so difficult because there's so many different bowings that you can do. You could go up bow, yawn, down bow, or you can try to do all of it on one bow. Yawn. And then like in terms of fingering, that's also a major consideration because that changes the sound a lot. And then I think on the top note, I like to end up on a two on E string. And I think just in a piece like Havanaise, I feel since it's pretty simple, there are so many different fingerings that you could use to really change the color of the sound. So that's like big picture, small picture, like constantly zooming out and seeing what you want to do. Of course, practicality is important because you don't want to do some crazy fingering that's going to make it really hard to play in tune. But I always liked Heifetz's recording of Havanaise, actually. I think he does that opening run really well. And it's not too sentimental, as Heifetz is usually not too sentimental, but it's nice. Like it's got a nice feeling to it. Yeah. Anyway, that's how I would kind of like I would get stuck on the very beginning for a long time, basically.
I see. Yeah, interesting. I mean, it makes sense. I totally understand why. And yeah, I would say I'm similar. I like to go through the whole piece and just barrel through it. And you learn the best by just immersing yourself into it. So whatever happens, happens, and just get to the end of it. Yeah, now that I'm, more developed, I've been playing for 20 plus years, I can basically get through a piece relatively easily. Not easily, but it's not like I simply can't play a section. I remember when I learned these I6 or something for the first time, I couldn't get past the first two lines because of those thirds and tenths. So it
Yeah, that's
wasn't,
really hard.
yeah, it wasn't that sort of, I mean, I've basically seen most of the technical difficulties on the violin. So I can basically get through a piece without too much trouble. And then, yeah, I go through it a bunch of times. And I think going along with knowing the big picture, as you're going through a piece many, many times, you should try to divide your time as equally as possible between all the sections, and things that you'll already do well, you should spend less time on because those come naturally. So for me, it's generally slower sections and singing sections. I generally have a more natural understanding and just phrasing to it that I don't have to think as
Mhm,
much. I always struggle more with the faster passages, just coordination, stroke, and just getting it clean. I mean, everyone does. So I would probably spend more time on that, just to be able to play the piece. Obviously, you have
mhm,
to spend time and work those passages up and build it up to tempo. But I would say that the slow sections deserve equal amount of scrutiny as the fast sections. And in fact, slow sections are almost harder. And in fact, much more imagination is required in slow sections
mhm,
because in fast sections, basically you can rely a lot on the contour of the notes and just being able to play it, which takes a lot of work, is already going to do 90% of the interpretive process, I think, for fast stuff, generally speaking.
mhm.
And,
That's
but
true.
for slow stuff, you can kind of play it and it can be very bland. And
Mhm,
so I would say, yeah, for the interpretive and imaginative stuff, that's where the slow stuff is really key. And so I would spend quite a lot of time just going through a passage and thinking about what fingerings and what bowings to use, because this is one of the most crucial things as a violinist. And now that I'm becoming independent and really learning everything on my own, I'm realizing it's so important to be able to use your own fingerings and bowings and figure out your own. Because when we're growing up, we always are given fingerings from someone else. And that's great. Obviously, you
mhm,
got to learn from someone and take inspiration. But nowadays, we have YouTube, and every piece essentially someone has played it. So if you really are struggling, you can literally just look up someone's playing and that will help you. But I'm realizing that, yeah, I need to think about what fingerings work best for me. And again, I tend to be very analytical, which is a good thing, but I tend to be indecisive and I tend to see the pros and cons of every fingering. And I
mhm,
sometimes get stuck there. But I
mhm,
think once you've kind of weighed those, then you have to match that with what interpretive imagination you want to bring and try to match that. And so that's a lengthy process. And that's
mhm,
why interpretation and playing a piece of music is so difficult because, I mean, yes, technically building something up is hard and takes time, but the piece grows with you as you develop and you get to know it more. So I would say that, yeah, it's really good that your interpretation does change over time. And I think it should for sure. And I'm not saying it doesn't for me. I think I just tend to be a little bit more analytical in general, even throughout the practicing process, that sometimes I don't think so much about the broad picture. But I think it's good because that imaginative part in the music is really what's guiding all that analytical work in the first place, right? It's
Mhm.
always to express the music, any technical thing you're doing. So, yeah, but it is really hard to express what you want to say musically if you don't know exactly what you're doing technically. Um,
Yeah,
some
that's
violinists
true.
basically just do stuff naturally and they almost can't explain it, and they're really good. But for me personally, I found that I can play much better when I can explain and teach myself what exactly it
Mhm.
is I'm doing. And if I can't verbally communicate to someone, I struggle to actually be convinced myself. So
Mhm.
that's why I'm really enjoying making teaching videos and just teaching in general, because I find that that's the best teacher for me. And that's why I don't think I need a teacher anymore, and why ultimately we should move away from having a regular teacher. Obviously, when it's the right time, but it's
Mhm.
because we become our own teachers.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the role of teachers is to enable you to teach yourself. Like,
Yes.
or that's something that at least I strive for in my own teaching, so that when you're alone and you're practicing, which is most of the week, since every teacher usually spends 1 hour a week with the student, which is really not very much. So it's really your responsibility, I think, as a teacher to facilitate a process where the student feels comfortable interpreting and teaching themselves. But also as a student, I think it's important to look outside of your lessons for inspiration, because there are a lot of people that I talk to who it's like, well, I did everything my teacher told me to do, so I don't know what else to do this week. And it's like, well, I feel like, you have to have a mind of your own, or like it's nice when what your teacher says and what you feel, it's nice when those things are aligned. But oftentimes I think a lot of teachers might say something where you feel like, "Oh man, I don't know if I want to do that," and that can also inspire you, because a teacher can say something that you really don't agree with, and you try it and you feel like, oh, this just doesn't feel like me. I don't like doing this. This feels awkward. And you try to do it in a way that feels convincing. But because if you don't like something a certain way, I don't think that you necessarily need a valid reason. If it doesn't feel good to you and you don't feel like you can play it well, I think that's valid reason enough. If you don't feel things a certain way, since you're trying to be expressive, it is your interpretation. So then I would explore new ways of playing. And of course, if what your teacher says just sounds better in the end, then maybe you're best off trying to figure out, maybe it's a technical problem. Maybe, you're not phrasing things in a way that makes sense. So you can't do what you want to do because it just logically is strange. Like there are those cases. Teachers always have a good reason for doing everything. But one thing that I remember when I was very young, I was driving in the car with my dad, and I asked my dad, "Well, why aren't we going home the way we usually go home?" And my dad said, "There's a million ways to do anything." And he was like, like sometimes people get very stuck into their own ways, and you just do the same thing all the time, or you just accept something as the right way to do something, the most efficient way to do something. And I find with music especially, but with a lot of things in life, we tend to get stuck in the way that we always do things. Well, in a phrase like this, I would always do this, and you always want to lead there. I think it's always important to challenge, to unravel your own thought, and to try new things, and always push yourself into a place where you feel a little bit uncomfortable. Well, they say that in life, when you do the same things every day and you're in a routine, your life feels much shorter because your brain compresses that information and you don't remember things because you always do things the same. So, actually, in an article I was reading recently, they said every day you should do one thing that doesn't match your current routine at all. And your brain will then just remember, and you'll actually feel like your life is longer because of that, which is good. I think everybody wants a longer life, but I think in music it's the same thing. I think it's not good to ever go on autopilot. And there are certain rules that are good to follow, but I think it's also important to push yourself to try new things. And maybe when you're spending time alone, you should do things that are very, very out there and untasteful. And you think, oh man, that's terrible. But I think usually when you hear something that's egregious, there are usually parts of that that you can take and use, maybe there, maybe somewhere else. But I think that without pushing the boundary of what is normal, you'll never get an exceptional interpretation. If you stay within the box, it'll just be nice. It won't be something that really grabs people and moves them. So I think it's always important to be experimental.
Yeah, I loved everything you said. Back from talking about teachers and some students being satisfied. I think a lot of students are good at just doing exactly what the teacher says. And there's beauty to that. Of course, you learn via the teacher in the beginning by imitating and doing exactly what they say. But yeah, eventually music becomes much more than that. It really becomes a personal investment into what you really want to say. And slowly through the years, from when we begin the violin to the mid years, and then eventually the later, more advanced years, teachers slowly shift the focus from telling you what to do and you following orders to them asking you what you want to do. And so it's really cool to see how that shift kind of plays out through one's teaching. And yeah, that
Hmm.
is the best teaching for sure.
Hmm.
And yeah, I guess because I've always been very curious, I've always wanted to do things in a different way. Like you mentioned, I like to try different things in violin playing in general. So I guess that has come more naturally to me. I guess it's because I never felt super comfortable, I guess. It's a blessing and a curse because I'm always searching for something, which is a beautiful thing. But sometimes it's hard because I don't feel really comfortable in what I'm doing. When that happens, it's hard, but you just end up doing something. And I think it's always important to do something rather than nothing. And so I love the process of just being there. And I stress this a lot to my students, and I try to do this in my life. If just being there is probably the most important step. And
Hmm.
whether or not it's good or not, that will come with time, I think. So,
Hmm. I think you're
yeah.
totally right.
Why don't we jump to combining the detailed
Okay.
work and the big picture stuff?
Okay. Well, I guess one thing that I was just thinking about that goes with this is I like what you just said about being there, being present in the moment when you're actually playing a piece on stage. Because with interpretation, I think having a big picture in mind is great, but there's also the present moment. Every time you play a piece, it should feel fresh and new, and it's easy to fall into routines again. I think routines are the enemy of creativity because when you play a phrase and you just do it as you've always done it, it's not special, you know? And I was playing some Chrysler pieces earlier today, rehearsing them, and also Estrelita by Heifetz and Fonts, which is just so beautiful. And I find that a lot of the charm that happens in these old recordings, I feel that the artists are just coming up with these things on the spot. And you don't always do exactly the same thing, and you don't always slide exactly the same. I think that slides are so expressive in this type of music, in these Chrysler short pieces, and it's very personal. And I think that when you're practicing at home, you should try things so many different ways so that in the moment of a performance, you have freedom to do things many different ways. Because if you practice things one specific way all the time, and I think that that's really good for drilling a fast passage. Say you have a huge run. Well, there's only really one or two ways to play that, you know? So I don't think that it's a problem if you just lock into, okay, boom, there's a perfect passage and, but for things that are slower, like you said, or very musical, I think there are so many different ways to phrase, and experimenting with that at home is one of the most important things about interpretation. And I think that when you're combining them, that's when it's most powerful because you understand the big picture and you're able to do all of the micro things. Now you have freedom to go where you want to go. And of course, within your big picture, there are a lot of different ways to do things. Like you may have three or four different ways, or maybe five, that you can think of in every piece. And I think that's really cool because you get to these points in the piece where you feel like you could go a variety of different ways, and all these paths will lead somewhere a little bit different. And depending on what you choose and how you feel that day, you can end up in a different musical place on a different day. And I think that's one of the beautiful things that keeps music alive. Because it's easy if you play a piece many, many times, and every time you do the exact same thing, well, it starts to feel really boring and you don't really want to play that piece anymore. And yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Being in the moment is everything. I talk about that a lot in my own playing and teaching. And yeah, I'm a pretty in the moment person because, yeah, I don't like to ever fall too much into routine. I think that's just something about me. And I think, yeah, when I perform a piece, I usually try to embrace the moment whenever I can. And it's hard because I find whenever I'm worried about a technical thing, it overrides my in the moment feeling. So that's where it doesn't quite come out for me. But I think it's a interesting case for me personally because I'm able to do everything I want to do on the violin, but because of mental things, I kind of do it, but it's not like the best, I guess, sometimes. And so that's where it's a tough balance for me personally because I think it just takes more time of learning and developing. Obviously, when you perform a piece, you should be ready to play it, obviously. But I guess for me, what's been hard is I'm able to play a piece, but I just haven't really figured out what I really want to say with it. And so yeah, that's a long struggle for every artist, but it is really key
Mhm.
to interpretation. It's not just being able to play it. I mean, we've both been trained at a very young age and we've both been playing all the hardest repertoire since very young. So it's not really a question for us, really, if we can play it or not. And so it becomes a much longer journey of really bringing it to a very personal and high level.
Mhm. That's totally true. And one thing that I will say, and we talked about this before in our episode about performance anxiety, but I think it merits re-mentioning. In performance, don't think, just feel. Because I find that every time I allow my brain to take control of what I'm doing in a performance, I start worrying about so many things. The brain is a big worrier for some reason. Not that you shouldn't have your brain involved in the process of music making. But I think that the brain does an excellent job during the practice stage before performance. I think in performance itself, you have to let your heart lead and just let your feelings lead you where you want to go, and your brain will follow because you've already trained your brain, you've already trained your fingers and your hands to do what you want to do. So if you just think in terms of feelings, I think that you'll end up with a performance that feels very impactful. And it's so hard to do though, because your brain wants to be active. Oh, I need to control this, otherwise things are going to go wrong. But in fact, the brain usually gets in the way, I find. in performance. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a great point you mentioned. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up again. I think that when I perform, also sometimes if I just allow myself to be free of these technical worries, then I just play it and I just accept how it ends up sounding. But again, if I worry about it, it always ends up sounding a little timid, and maybe it was okay, but didn't really communicate it again. And so, yeah, it's really tough. And sometimes you won't really know what will work until you go on stage because something might all of a sudden feel different when you're on stage.
Hmm.
Because again, there's millions of different ways to play the violin. And so it's tough because sometimes what you do on stage, it might magically work. That usually doesn't happen. But sometimes you might do something that just works really well. Uh,
Yeah.
but it often takes a lot of experimentation.
Yeah, I will say I have been shocked before, like going towards a shift or a huge shift or some passage that I've never gotten before. Gotten so shocked that I've had like a little oopsies afterwards because I'm like, ah, man, I can't believe it. I knelt this shift. I thought I was gonna miss it, and then I'm so surprised that I just forget the rest. So it's kind of funny when that happens. Ideally, you don't want on stage to be the first time that things work out, but I think that believing that everything will be better on stage is good because even though I know I talked about before, like you have to be prepared for your worst to be what everyone hears, I think in your mind, you don't go out on stage, all right, well, I'm going to play my worst, like I think that, and people are still going to like it, like I think that ideally you always want to be in an expressive state of mind and excited to share your music and all that kind of stuff. And if I may say so, Stephen, I think that I've never heard a performance of yours that sounds timid or tense or unexpressive. I feel like you're always very expressive on stage. And I think that that's one of those things too, where in your mind, so many things are happening. But sometimes, no matter what happens in your head, I think the way your performance is perceived is different than the way your performance feels inside, too. Like, I've had performances where I feel super great and the audience is super lackluster. And then other times where it's completely opposite, where I'm like, oh man, I'm embarrassed. And the audience really likes it. That's the best playing I've ever seen. Like, wow, well, you need to listen to more, violinists. Yeah, so, yeah, anyway, without dissing the audience, obviously, it's just a personal diss to myself.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think an audience that shows up to a performance of yours, they've invested time and they're already happy even if you play and something goes wrong. I think if you bring that energy and that excitement and the mindset you're talking about of I'm just here to share and whatever happens happens, but I'm here to share first and foremost. That will lead to generally the best performances.
Mhm. I think in terms of combining these 2 parts to the detail work and the big picture, I feel the reason we started talking about performing is an integral part of combining these 2 is performing in studio class or recording yourself, putting everything together because it's impossible to see if everything all your detail work and the big picture stuff sticks together unless you experience everything in full. So I think in practice, we often break things up into sections and we might run through a piece, but that's limited, especially running through with piano. Having rehearsals with piano, adequate rehearsals are really important, I think.
Yeah. So by going through a piece with piano and with a recording and seeing the overall picture, then you'll be able to tell, oh, is my big picture there? Is my small picture there? And sometimes if you're thinking about big picture, you'll miss some small details and sometimes vice versa. And so, yeah, I loved what you said, just performing as much as you can, recording, being in that spotlight is the best teacher for sure.
Hmm. That's totally true. Is there anything else that you want to talk about in terms of detail work or and big picture stuff, how to link them together?
Not really. I think it's just a constant process of going back and forth. And I mean, you almost do it subconsciously. When you do it a lot, it just becomes a natural part. But it is so easy to get zeroed in on something that isn't so important. I mean, I do it all the time, but it's important to remember that you're going to be fine if something doesn't
Mhm.
go perfectly as you hoped.
That's true. And one thing that I always think about with small details things is sometimes I'll obsess over one bow change or, man, this vibrato's a little wobbly. But remember, people are hearing the whole piece. So if one note is not exactly perfect, that's okay. But it's not okay if your overall structure and everything is not perfect. One thing that I wanted to ask you, Stephen, I just thought of a question. How do you know what to do and how to fix things if, and I've heard this from a lot of people, sometimes you feel like you're so musical inside, but then other people who listen to you might say, you're not musical and keep giving you musical suggestions. Or you listen to yourself and you feel like, I feel like I'm expressing so much, but nothing is coming out. How do you fix that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Mr. Sloman talked about it with me in a lesson where I was playing the second movement of Mozart Concerto number 4, and he was like, "Yeah, I can tell you're feeling everything and it's expressive playing, but it could sound even more expressive." He was basically teaching me that I could manifest it even more with my inflection and with my vibrato. And so, first, trying to maximize the inflections that you're making, the actual technical changes that you're doing to the music. That's where it kind of starts. Well, it should start with the imagination, but in terms of how it actually sounds, you kind of have to start there in order to convince an audience. And then once you've kind of figured out that, which takes a long time, to sort out what you're
Mhm.
doing at every moment of every piece, note by note, literally. After that, then it's about trying to communicate to an audience and not just doing it technically, but feeling it and being a little bit of a showman, I guess, or being outwardly expressive. Because I know I mentioned it in like episode 6 or something about judging a competition and how sometimes the jury didn't get what the person was trying to express. I mean, I think I'm very compassionate in that I can kind of see and look into what that person is trying to express, even if they're not so outward about it. But I think there is a certain amount of outward expression that you do need to portray a little bit, or else it's just hard for an audience to get what you're doing, even if you're doing really expressive things on the violin.
Mhm.
I think sometimes the older violinists seem to be kind of more like a statue, but that's because they're just so focused on expressing something deep, and it's just like 100% expression all the time. And sometimes they're so sincere about it that they don't really move. But yeah, that type of playing isn't so common now. Nowadays, people move a lot more.
Mhm.
But yeah, having some sort of outward expression without being fake with it, obviously, but
Mhm.
naturally, you need to move in music because motion is
Mhm.
essential.
I agree. And one thing that I think is always a good test of whether everything that you feel is making it into your sound is exactly what you just talked about. There's this pianist in Chicago that I used to play with all the time. Her name was Milana, and she was an incredible musician. And I always liked to move when I was younger. And sometimes she felt she was like, Zachary, all of your musicality is going into your body and it's not in the music. She's like, just stand still and put your feelings into the music itself. And sometimes by not moving and just really focusing on the sound itself really helped me. And I believe in moving personally because I think that motion really helps you craft a beautiful sound, but it's always important to make sure that whatever movement that you have or whatever facial expressions show matches what you're trying to express and is an addition to what you're doing rather than a subtraction, which it can easily be because I think that when your brain splits things up, it starts to, oh, I feel so expressive, so I'm going to move. But sometimes that expression doesn't make it into the sound. And, or I feel so much emotion. Let me, make this big face here, or like, you see sometimes violinists, they'll like open their mouth and look up at the ceiling, all tearfully. And sometimes that makes it into the music and sometimes it doesn't. But only you can know whether those things help you or distract you. And I think that when your brain does something like that, it proves you wouldn't do something like that if you don't feel those feelings inside. And that's where I think what you're talking about, the authenticity of interpretation, is very important. Because at the end of the day, when you're a violinist or a musician, I think in a sense you are an actor. But a good actor, you'll never think is actually acting. You'll never look at a film and you'll say, "Man, what a great actor." When you're watching a great actor, you forget that they're acting in the first place. And it's because all of the feelings come from a genuine place, and to them, what they're depicting is real. And it's sincere and genuine. So I think that when you're depicting emotions, it's important to remember that whatever you feel is genuine, but you need to convey these emotions in a way that can connect to the audience and help them feel something too. I think it's really powerful when an audience is able to capture the feelings that you're expressing directly. Sometimes an audience will get something completely different from what you're trying to express, and that's beautiful as well. But it's really especially powerful, I think, when an audience member comes up to you afterwards and they describe everything that they felt, and you feel like, wow, that's exactly what I was trying to express. It's a really special feeling.
Yeah, that's all great. And I think it's the goal of every musician and violinist is to be so specific about what you are trying to express at every moment, both emotionally and technically, and really bring it out in both dimensions in every single moment of the performance. And so that was a big key of what I worked on in my last 2 years at Yale in school. It's just making more expression, finding more ways of expressing myself in a more full manner. Because, yeah, we're all expressive. I mean, we all want to say something with the music, but we can easily get bogged down on technique, or we can easily feel expressive, but it not necessarily come out. I think Ty was great for me, Ty Murray, my former teacher, because she really focused on how to bring that expression that you have to life in terms of actual technique. And it's important to at least know a little bit about it. I mean, she was great because she could teach me a lot of things, but you have to technically really do different things in order to bring out the character, or else it really won't come out.
Hmm. I totally agree. Always great advice from Ty.
Yeah. Let's
Hmm.
jump to our practice tip of the week. For this week, I will present a practice tip that is similar to a lot of practice tips that I tend to give, which is note grouping, but it's actually beat grouping this time. And again, this is something I learned and Ty Murray stressed a lot. The most obvious example is in a Mozart concerto or any classical period piece, and it's in four. First beat is strong beat, second beat weak, third beat is an emphasis beat, fourth beat is a weak beat leading up to the first beat. Now, you shouldn't use this as a formula and just do it all the time because sometimes Mozart accents the second beat. But it's a good general understanding of how the beat structure should work. Ty Murray was really big on using this beat structure to influence her phrasing, particularly with the bow. And so not just note grouping for learning a passage and building it up, but also using the beat structure and using that to guide how you phrase. And especially in fast passages where, you've got lots of notes, it's hard to know exactly what you're doing with the bow if it's all just détaché, for example. But if you kind of set, okay, first beat is I'm maybe using half an inch of bow, and then second beat I'm using an inch more of bow, or I usually don't get that specific, but like there's different ways that you can group stuff in a more scientific way. And a lot of it is based off of how music is measured. So music is so scientific, actually, besides being art and beautiful and emotional, it's actually very scientific. And if you look at music in a scientific way, rhythm is such a beautiful and integral part to music, obviously. It kind of defines music. If you can look at a piece and understand the rhythmic structure of the beats and the hierarchy, then you go from there. That will really help determine your phrasing, I would say.
That's great. Really good advice. I totally agree with everything you said. And I know that I'm usually on the other side of things with not liking to look at music as a scientific thing. But you're right. Like every note has a frequency and rhythm. There's a reason why certain things feel right, why a downbeat feels like a downbeat. And if you misplace downbeats, music feels very awkward and strange. There is a science to music, especially in something like Mozart, which is something where a lot of the charm is found in observing certain traditions in phrasing. And I think that that's really good. Of course, looking for new ways to express is always great too. But yeah, great practice tip.
Yeah, let's jump to recording recommendation. I'm curious what your recording recommendation is for this week.
Okay, well, my recording recommendation goes along with yesterday. Just for fun, I read through the whole Glasnow violin concerto, which I haven't played in many, many years. And so I decided that today I would recommend Nathan Milstein's recording of the Glasnow violin concerto. Really a terrific piece and not played enough, in my opinion. I think it's just such an incredible piece, really fun to play. I think that the third movement is just so fun. The first movement's great, the second movement's great, the cadenza is really fun, the third movement's super fun. It's rare that you get to do pizzicato in a movement like that, or I mean in a concerto in general, especially the way that Glasnow uses it. It's just for fun. I think the third movement is full of energy and excitement, and I love Milstein's tone. It's so beautiful, and I think that when I was younger, I had this huge album, which was like, I think 3 CDs or maybe even 4 CDs of Milstein's playing. He played Brahms Concerto, Prokofiev 2, Glasnow, and Saint Saens number 3, and something else, but I don't remember what it was. And I always, in particular, really loved his Prokofiev 2, Glasnow, and Saint Saens. I thought he just felt like his tone was so warm and really beautiful. His phrasing always made a lot of sense. It never felt like he was playing anything in a crazy way or anything too outside the box, but everything that he did was so beautiful. I really just felt like if I wanted to hear somebody play just really well, I always went to those CDs of Milstein.
Yeah, great recording recommendation. I actually remember when we were on the card to MIC Academy, we were listening to his recording of Glasnow, I believe.
Wow, you've got a good memory. I don't remember that.
Yeah, I remember pretty distinctly actually, because I don't think I heard that recording of Milstein. And
Oh, really?
yeah,
Wow, that's amazing. Sorry that I forgot, but yeah,
no, no
that's
worries.
cool.
Yeah, Milstein is someone that I actually don't listen to enough. I mean, he's a fantastic violinist, obviously. Yeah, Glasnow is such a hard piece. It's shorter than Tchaikovsky and Brahms, but it's like equally hard in difficulty. Actually, Mr.
Mhm.
Sloman thought it was harder than Tchaikovsky, and I
Really?
Yeah, I think in
Mm,
some ways it is. It is so short. It's very compact. It's like 23 minutes.
mhm.
So, and it just gets harder throughout the concerto. The first movement's the easiest.
Yeah, it really does. When I was reading through, I got through the first movement, I was like, "Whoa, that's it?" I was like, "Ah, yeah, that's not bad at all." I mean, the second movement starts to get, like, kinda hard. I was like, "Man, this second movement's really long." Felt like the first movement could have been a little longer so that the second movement could be a little shorter. Second movement has a lot of hard stuff in it, I think.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's really hard. And then the third movement is really, really hard. It's really fast, really high, really awkward jumps, left hand pizzicato, everything. So, yeah.
It's funny because I don't know, I feel like I mean, I do think that is hard, but the 3rd movement of Glass now feels kinda comfortable for me. Like,
Really.
yeah, the 2nd movement and the cadenza feel like the hardest part. It's funny, but I feel like maybe because I always feel excited to play 3rd movement, the 3rd movements of everything always feel like the easiest movement for me because I think I'm more excited to learn the notes and I know what it sounds like clearly in my head. So my hand just kind of jumps around and it doesn't feel like so much of a process versus sometimes like in the second movement, I don't listen to second movements as much in general because they're just, they're kind of long and slow and and even though sometimes they're really beautiful and I love second movements, I just listen to the third movements more because it makes me feel excited. So I think that when I'm learning second movements and there's like a really hard part, I'm like, oh my goodness. In my opinion, the ideal second movement is Tchaikovsky's Concerto's second movement. Nothing hard in there, just a beautiful slow melody. That's what I love. Something that's not too crazy.
That's so
Yeah.
funny. Yeah. I'm kind of the opposite. I like slow stuff, so the fast stuff usually catches me off guard. But I haven't looked at the Glasnow concerto in years, so I'm sure
Wow.
it'll be a little bit more manageable this time around.
I feel like you would look at it and say, "This is easy." I mean, it's not, like, easy, but I think musically it's difficult and everything, and there are technical challenges for sure, but I think overall it feels like a very manageable piece, and maybe just because I haven't heard or played Glasnost in so long, I just felt really excited to play it. Because sometimes you hear a lot of concertos a lot like Sibelius or something like that, and you take a look at it and it's like, "Oh, man, another Sibelius." Like, there's a lot of pressure with playing a concerto that's played all the time because then you feel like you have to do something different, but everyone's already done it so many different ways, like, so I think with Glasnost or a concerto that's lesser played, it's so great because you feel like anything that you do feels fresh and it feels innovative. Even if you play the most stereotypical interpretation, because it's not played so often, that's already special.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, Glasnov is not often played because the orchestra part is very hard. It's very hard to put together with the
Mm.
soloist. So it's not often played because it's usually not worth that many rehearsals for a professional orchestra to put together with a soloist, but it is a really
Wow.
special piece. And one last final note on Nathan Milstein. I think that what sets him apart is he just has a love for the violin. He loves the violin almost more than he loves music. And he just allows the violin to sing naturally, I would say. He never presses too much into the string. He's virtuosic for sure, but he likes just the natural resonance of the violin. I mean, he's got one of the most amazing strats, but sometimes he just lets the violin sing without vibrating a ton. Or when he does vibrate, it is very warm. But I think he just has a different perception of sound than a lot of violinists. And I think his perception of virtuosity is more in being quick and agile rather than pressing into the string compared to someone
Mhm.
like Stern or yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, that's why I think that I noticed when I was younger that he had a high, shoulder. And I don't see it a lot in a lot of the recordings that I've seen of him, but definitely I remember before his shoulder would just come up like that. I feel like he's maybe suspending his arm a little bit more like you do, Stephen, like rather than just allowing the arm weight to really sink in. And I think he gives such a beautiful tone. And of course, you can do that with a nice strat, and he just coaxes the sound out of the instrument and allows the instrument to sing. It's really so beautiful, I think.
Yeah, I don't know how these violinists play with such strong Russian bow grips from the hour school, but yeah, Milstein is completely there. He's literally just completely slanted, and it's super good for stuff like Paganiniana, which he wrote. It's just super
Hmm.
crisp because there's no delay in articulation. It's like spike right down into the string. So that's why he plays so cleanly. It's partially because of his bow grip. You can make any bow grip work, so I'm not saying you have to do Russian, but that's also why I think he doesn't push too much into the string, because with the Russian grip, if you push into the string too much, you get that sort of gritty sound, which maybe he didn't like so much. So he just allowed the violin to sing naturally really well.
Beautiful. All right. Well, I guess that finishes up our episode.
Well, yep. Hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll see you on episode 13. Bye.
Bye.